not being afraid to offend the devil, and actually kind of like looking forward to that. I think as a naturally rebellious person, and I
embrace that rebelliousness.
exactly, I have an opportunity to offend somebody. This is an exciting idea. Like there's somebody that we can offend. Making politics religious in and of itself is a huge reason why it's so polarizing when we have those topics. And that's why everybody gets so frustrated and up in arms, because it's almost attacking our religious beliefs, not just our political tax code or criminal justice system. It's an attack of the faith of the individual.
I would say that society's default right now is to just not say anything.
Yep.
And to not stand up for truth. And that's, I think, the issue. I think why we're here is we've felt this societal default fall to such a level that it's like, no, we really need some voices to stand up for things.
Someone's got to say it, right? Yeah.
Without that inner guilt that sometimes I think we correlate to the spirit. We think we do something new or something that's hard and it hurts. And sometimes we think, oh, that doesn't feel very good. That can't be the spirit.
I shouldn't be doing this.
Shouldn't we do this? Maybe I should just stop. And so the same thing can apply with anything as we mature and we grow up. Maybe you didn't play outside on Sunday, or maybe you wore church clothes on Sunday, or maybe like pick your thing in the church that church culture tells you you're supposed to do these things a certain way. And then as you mature, you realize like, oh, okay, there's a bigger principle at play here. If you've been doing that your whole life, and then you don't,
weird and wrong.
It kind of feels wrong, right? And that is something that we conflate with the spirit. That we do need to live by true principles, but the trick is that there's application, and that's why we always go back to the core principles. When someone asks you a question about the application of the gospel, like that, never answer the direct question.
Peace is not just the absence of contention and fighting, right? Peace is not the absence of war. You can be at peace even as there is a war raging around you.
Exactly.
Right? And that peace is going to come by fighting your battles.
What was happening before you came to earth?
Right? There's a big war, right?
The war in heaven, right? And is God still at peace?
Welcome to the No Bushel podcast. We are your hosts, Big Ben and Burning Bushman. We are excited to have a good conversation with you guys today.
So today's topic is when silence becomes sin. Just let that settle in for a little bit. Because so often we think that not saying something is the good thing to do.
The avoidance of conflict.
But where it's actually sin. It's another flipping. We think in our mind it's good, but in reality, it's not. And I guess the other side of that coin too would be the virtue of offending Satan and how we should be offending Satan.
Yeah.
But I hope that we can also get into some experiences that maybe you've towed the line. I'm sure all of you have had experiences like that where you have tried to stand up for something, to be principled, to teach truth, and you've tried to do it in a loving way, and you've still offended somebody. And it feels bad when you offend somebody. It's no fun. So stick around. If you like this type of thing, please subscribe, like the page.
Share with family and friends.
Yes.
All the above.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's get into it. I'm excited to kind of get into this particular topic. One of the phrases that I really, as you were talking, really sticks out to me is not being afraid to offend the devil, and actually kind of like looking forward to that. I think as a naturally rebellious person, and I
embrace that rebelliousness.
exactly, I have an opportunity to offend somebody. This is an exciting idea. Like there's somebody that we can offend. And it'd be okay, I guess. And the overarching concept behind it, right, is maybe not necessarily offending the devil himself, but just the people that stand for some of his principles and ideas and those types of things, right? And while we don't necessarily advocate for, putting people down, the premise is standing up for truth, right? And
Absolutely.
not being afraid of what somebody else is going to think of you standing up for them, but rather being comfortable.
So we live in a very divided society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the key places where this plays out is in politics.
Yeah, definitely.
And from either side. I mean, you can be right or left. And while, sure, I certainly align more with conservative principles. And so typically you think of the progressive or liberal side as maybe I don't agree with that as much. That being said, there are actually aspects of the progressive liberal side that I do support and am in line with because of righteous principles. Like
Mm-hmm.
as people who fight for truth, I think it's paramount that we not just align with a group, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Like, sure, we have a party system, so like we'll vote for certain parties or whatnot. And in general, we support more of the ideals of one party over another, and that's fine. But if we get so narrow-minded that we think that our party is righteousness, that's also another peril that we have to realize that righteousness comes from God, not from our political party, not from society at large. And so we have to be tied to God, and then that will help guide the political movements that we are supportive of or not supportive of.
That's something that is very much in the focal point in today's political system, right? Where because of the polarization of politics in today's world, most people are going to say, I think generally most people probably, well, I'm a Republican, so I'm just going to vote Republican on everything, right? And just put an R on every name on the ticket, or put a D on every name of the ticket for the Democrat side. And the danger that comes with that is what you're alluding to. It's if you subscribe to a group rather than to each individual idea or concept, then the group will determine your path rather than your own self determining what is correct, and leaning on God for that guidance, right? So if the Democrat or the Republican side has one thing that's not necessarily great, but you're willing to look past it because all of these other things you align yourself with, well, then there's some hypocrisy involved with, you are ignoring something that is not good to benefit. And now politics is a little bit different because at some point you still have to vote one way or another, right? So you do have to somewhat accept that
A better good
a better good, right?
versus worse. Yeah, I misspoke that, but something like.
But I mean, you have to accept that's going to be the people that you're voting for will inevitably have some good and bad that you agree or disagree with. But what you believe and what you actually stand up for, you have the option to specify, oh no, I don't like this, or I don't agree with that point, but I do like these other things. Rather than just saying, well, I'm voting Democrat or I'm voting Republican.
Exactly.
You can specify what you like and what you don't.
And oftentimes it's not that we want to go along with some of those things, but in large part, life is busy and we have so many things going on that it's just easier. It's like a default. It's like, okay, I don't have time to think about this, so I'm just going to default to the Democrat or the Republican view because that's generally what I am. And so rather than take the time to think about it, but then that default over time, while that, for one thing here or there, maybe that's okay. But if you perpetually do that, then you're just signing away your agency and your choice.
One of the things that I've thought about recently, and I mentioned this to you the other day, was that from a political standpoint, today's politics is vastly different than what politics were even 10, 15 years ago, right? And you think 20, 30 years ago was a big shift. When I think of politics, like if I was learning in school what politics are, I think of like tax codes and, coming up with laws for civilization and society and how we interact with each other and, what what's a crime versus what's not a crime. That's kind of the things that I think about what politics is or maybe should be. But today's world, politics is very much um, it has a religious component to it, where we have these debates about these huge topics that are hot topics, right? That I think that's part of the purpose of it. Honestly, is if politicians can get you to focus on this one topic that they can find a following in, then that following is probably more willing to ignore some of the things that they don't do on the tax code or whatever it might be. And so we focus on these religious things, and by doing that, it makes politics actually religious.
Pro-choice versus pro-life, or the various aspects that do have a lot of religious implications, and yet now many churches won't even touch it. Like abortion, a lot of churches don't even touch it anymore because it's political,
even though they have a doctrinal stand on that issue, right? But it's a politics thing, so it's a red flag. It's a bad juju to talk about politics in church.
I thought that was interesting in our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When was the last time you remember abortion being talked about in a church setting?
I couldn't even tell you. Yeah.
And we had a talk, this was probably a year ago. I think it was Elder Anderson, maybe, that gave a talk on how we should be talking about this in church. And this is an important religious principle, ideal that we should uphold and striving to preserve life. And when he came out with that, I was like, oh wow, like we should be talking about this.
We have an opinion and we should be talking about it. Like, yeah.
But that in the face of the other messages that said, be peacemakers, be peacemakers, be peacemakers. And talking about abortion doesn't really feel like being a peacemaker,
right?
Most of the time, like there's your words are going to butt heads or say something that is hurtful or harmful to somebody. And there are tough interactions that happen. However, if we stay silent, then that is sin. Yeah, we have to stand firm in these things.
The silence itself, I don't know, is the sin, but it allows for the sinful actions and nature to take over the good things, right?
Is a lack of courage sin?
That's a good question. I don't know.
So there are sins
being a coward a sin?
Yeah, I'd say that it. So there are sins of omission and sins of commission. Okay. I would view this as
a sin of omission.
Yeah, exactly. You're not actively sinning, but by not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if sin is going against the will of God, then you are still going against the will of God.
Even though you're not doing anything for the will of God, by not doing anything, you're not doing it. So if you're not with us, then you're against us.
Yes.
So along these frames, like you mentioned abortion, and that's a huge topic in today's political world, right? And we don't necessarily need to get into abortion specifically, but that's a good example of what we're talking about, right? The religion, I'm going to make up a word here, religiousizing of politics. I'm sure there's an actual term for that, but making politics religious in and of itself is a huge reason why it's so polarizing when we have those topics, because although we may not all feel that we're brave enough to stand up for what we are truly believing in, when something disagrees and someone attacks our belief, our religion, then we tend to get a little bit more flustered or offended and are willing to stand up for things. Someone gives me an argument about why taxes should be lower or higher. Like, I may not disagree with you, but I'm not going to get offended by that. But someone says, attacks my faith because I believe in a Christian values, and that shouldn't be part of politics, then I'm more willing to stand up for it. And that's where I see politics in today's world is becoming more religious. And that's why everybody gets so frustrated and up in arms, because it's almost attacking our religious beliefs, not just our political tax code or criminal justice system. It's an attack of the faith of the individual. And that's, in my opinion, that's why it's become so polarizing. So you either believe this or you don't, and if you don't, then you hate everything else that I believe in, and that's where what we talked about earlier, having that group mentality versus this is I have each of these particular doctrines or principles that I believe in, sets it apart.
So I love the phrase Christian unity and righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than thinking of ourselves as political beings, we should be thinking ourselves as sons and daughters of God.
Yeah.
And with that first and foremost, our focus, then that will help guide our actions in whatever political realm we are in. And yeah, far too often those get inverted and we put our political stance, and this is even happening. I mean, you see this in the church all the time too, where people conflate religious principles to government programs or government things and say,
Right.
okay, so, and you can see it both ways. So sustainability, right? Like taking care of the earth. You can make the argument both ways. So the left seems to kind of have the main talking points, if you will,
Yeah.
for the world, with the greenhouse emissions, all these things, and then people will fight that because they're trying to save the world with we need to be good stewards, guys. And so if they invert that and they're Democrat first and then religion,
Mm-hmm.
then they fight for these principles and do it ardently because it's
Right.
become their
It
religion.
becomes a religious point, right?
And you can see the exact flip side of that. I mean, you can make the argument on the Republican side too for take your pick of topic. But it's that inversion that's so dangerous in politics.
Yep, for sure.
So there are times, the Savior asks us to turn our cheek, right? Turn the cheek, but we also need to not turn a blind eye to things.
Right.
And that's, I think, the biggest question. Okay, when do I take it? And when do I fight for it?
Yep.
And there's no clear, specific answer. Even in the Book of Mormon, I was studying this recently. So war, like we generally in the church think of war as an okay thing to go to when you have a decent reason to go to war. The scriptures are full of wars and very righteous men as
Right.
captains of leaders of armies. But you also have the anti-Nephi-Lehi's, who were basically pacifists. I mean, they were not going to fight, and that was accounted to them for righteousness. And so, do you have to be? There's not one situation that's always going to be the right choice, and that's why I think people. Once again, I go back to this word default. What we naturally do when we don't think about something is the core root here that what we choose to do by default might be to be a pacifist or might be to fight. And I would say that society's default right now is to just not say anything.
Yep.
And to not stand up for truth. And that's, I think, the issue. I think why we're here is we've felt this societal default fall to such a level that it's like, no, we really need some voices to stand up for things.
Someone's got to say it, right? Yeah.
And if no one else is going to, I guess we'll try to. And I've been very happy that we are seeing more voices out there being willing to take a stand on some of these things. But it is a learning curve. So I was watching a podcast recently. It was a lady from Utah, and she had at her school, they were, so this was like prime LDS community.
Okay.
She said her school was primarily like her. And so like she knew all the people.
They all go to church together.
together.
Yeah.
And they had some book club type thing come in that wanted to advocate for these books in the school district and was like very supportive of this thing. And it was a lot of very woke ideologies, books about transgender and being, uh, you know, different genders or same-sex attraction, things of that nature in children's books. And she disagreed with it, and so she was trying to fight against it. And she was receiving pushback from people throughout her state, including her state president, and including her, like her bishop and like other people just saying like, oh, just go along to get along. Like we'll just,
Right.
it'll be okay. Like it's not the end of the world, type of philosophy. And she's like, no, like I can't stand for this. This is not right. We should not have this in our schools, and I don't want my children to have this in their school. And so she ran for the school board to really with that as a key part
To
of
be
her.
able to have her own change, right?
Exactly. And she lost, and she's like, well, I guess nobody cares about this here. And like of all places, in a very highly LDS population. And so it caused her to, and I liked her explaining her experience because she kind of talked about how when she first noticed and started to say a few things, it was really uncomfortable for her to say anything.
Yeah.
And yet she kind of felt like she needed to, but and she kind of felt bad sometimes when she said something because like, well, I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm trying to say things. But then how over time, the more that she realized and understood just how against her that there were specific people that were really pushing this agenda, and how unchristlike and how really of the devil they were.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just can't be quiet. And the longer that she stood up and became a public figure to stand for those things, the more that she was able to do that without that inner guilt that sometimes I think we correlate to the spirit. We think we do something new or something that's hard and it hurts. And sometimes we think, oh, that doesn't feel very good. That can't be the spirit.
I shouldn't be doing
I
this
shouldn't
anymore,
be doing
right?
this. Maybe I should just stop.
This is such a good point because I totally agree with this that when we do something new or hard and it's uncomfortable, we struggle wanting to do it again.
Mhm.
Even if you know that it's the right thing to do, it's hard to do something that's uncomfortable. Nobody, I mean, that's why it's uncomfortable. Nobody enjoys doing uncomfortable things. But as you're mentioning, the more that she did it, the more comfortable she got being able to do those things. And this works both ways, right? In a good or a bad situation.
True.
On the flip side, you can have the spirit telling you what you're doing is sin, right? Uh, you be in the middle of stealing something and you feel the spirit say, "Hey, you shouldn't be stealing." And you can feel that inner guilt saying, "Don't do that." And you do it once, and then the second time's a little bit easier because you've already done it once. And so this applies both directions,
Yeah.
but understanding what that's where having that moral standard and having your principles that you actually live by, that your what's the word that I'm looking for? Your diligence, not diligence.
Obedience.
There's a D word. I can't remember what it is now. Um, anyway,
So
but
this brings me to a concept of fences, which we've talked about in
yes.
the past, and that is this idea that so you talked about it from one side, but then from the opposite side of this, and this is why I think we can conflate it with the spirit
Mhm.
inappropriately, because on the negative side, yeah, like you do something bad or you sin, and you do feel that kind of godly sorrow and
Right.
that little pit in your stomach. But then at the same time, you grow up a certain way and you're taught to keep certain rules. There are sins, flawed chastity, right?
Mhm.
No sexual relations outside of marriage. But then we sometimes create what I'll call fences around those that keep us safe from breaking the law, but
Mhm.
in and of themselves are not the law. So case
Right.
in point, I had somebody come to me as a bishop once, and they felt really bad. Temple recommend question. Is there something that in your past that you feel like you need to repent of? And like, well, I was watching stars with my boyfriend, and we laid down on the ground, and I just wanted to repent. And I was like, wait, you just laid, like, okay, so were you laying on top of each other? Were you touching each other? Were you like all these things? Like, no, we were just laying on the ground. In her mind, she had made this rule that I want to protect myself. I never want to lay down even next to someone of the opposite sex until I'm married, which I'm not saying it's a bad rule. That's a fine rule to abide by yourself. We all need to create, places to keep us safe. But at the same time, it's like, you didn't actually do anything bad other than breaking your own rule.
Your own rules that you've created, but not God's rule that's been created, right?
And so the same thing can apply with anything as we mature and we grow up. Maybe you didn't play outside on Sunday, or maybe you wore church clothes on Sunday, or maybe like pick your thing in the church that church culture tells you you're supposed to do these things a certain way. And then as you mature, you realize, like, oh, okay, there's a bigger principle at play here, and different situations might lend a little bit different to this situation. And so you might decide maybe decide, okay, I don't need to wear Sunday clothes all day on Sunday. But then the first time you do, you don't. If you've been doing that your whole life, and then you don't,
weird and wrong.
It kind of feels wrong, right? And that is something that we conflate with the Spirit, and then we either act on that, or we just feel conflicted inside until we do it enough times that we don't. But then you're still always going to question, like, oh, should I really be doing this, or should I really be doing? And I think that's, to some degree, part of that's just maturational, and you'll develop and get over. But those defaults, going back to that default, like our core things, what we've done a certain way, sometimes it's really good to groove and to make a new groove, and to try something new, and to be okay. To be okay trying something new, even if you're wrong. So that might sound kind of bad, but because we don't want to actually sin. But part of learning and this earth life is to develop and to learn and to grow in our understanding of truth. And if you're choosing something and you don't really know, sometimes the only way to really know is to experience it. And so
and that's an important distinction to make, because if you know that it's wrong, then obviously you don't need to do that thing to find out that it's wrong if you already know that it's wrong. But if you're doing something and then you find out that what you did is wrong after having done that because of the way you feel or the things that you learned, whatever it is, then that gives you that learning opportunity to grow. Okay,
so there's a movie out. It was done by one of the church people that does church movies. It's about missionaries in Germany, right when they shut down Germany. I think it was Germany. Anyway.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So something that you would think would be, well, of course, like if you steal something, like, of course it's a sin to steal something, right?
Right.
But then you get into a different context. And let's say you're stuck in Germany, and the only way to get out of Germany is to steal a train. And if you don't, you're going to get taken, and bad things will happen to you, right? This happened in this movie, and they take this train, and they're all like freaking out because they're stealing a train, to get to a certain place.
They're really trying to save their lives,
and they're trying to save their lives. But like, I can understand that. Like, I'm freaking out. Like, I'm stealing something, and I know I shouldn't be stealing something, but I also have this other, like, there's various goods, and the ultimate good means I need to get out of here, and the only way I can do that is to steal this train.
Right.
So like, why are we talking about this? I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't live by true principles. We do need to live by true principles, but the trick is that there's application, and that's why we always go back to the core principles.
The core doctrine, the core principles that we have is what we live by, and that is what I think each of us needs to come to terms with, is what do I believe personally? Going back to, I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do I believe each and every one of the doctrines of the church? I belong to the Republican Party. I believe every single thing that they're not necessarily. Maybe I do. I have to take the time to actually internalize each of those doctrines and then decide for myself how I'm going to apply each of those teachings, those principles in my life, right?
So Elder Cuvier was at a stake, came to our stake. He was a member of he was a general authority. And in the leadership session, I believe it was, maybe it was the adult session, but he had a great analogy. And I thought this was a really good and kind of goes to this exact point. So let me tell the story that he told. So first off, he was a mission president. And when he was a brand new mission president, he really wanted to get to know his elders and sisters better. And so he wanted to interview every missionary throughout the mission in just the first couple of weeks of his mission. And in preparation for that, he sent information to them and said, I want you to come with one really deep question, like a question that you're really concerned about, or is really top of mind to you, something that you've been thinking about, or that you're concerned about, and doctrinal or otherwise. Just have at least one good question that I can answer and talk with you about.
Yeah.
And so he was preparing for this, and he was like, hey, going to preach my gospel and trying to study the doctrine and really know, he was excited to get some really good, thoughtful questions from these missionaries. And and he was funny telling the stories. It's like probably 80% of the missionaries had the same question. And the question was, are you going to let us drink Coke? And so then he said, so how would you answer that question? He said, they wanted me to answer it yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not going to help them grow. That's not going to help them do anything. And he talked about doctrine and principles and application. And he kind of related it to a tree. The roots of a tree as being like your core doctrines, the trunk and branches of the tree as being your core principles, and then your leaves being the application. He says, when someone asks you a question about the application of the gospel like that, never answer the direct question.
With your application.
Never answer with another leaf question, with a leaf answer. Answer with a trunk or roots answer.
Interesting. I like that analogy.
And so why are we talking about this? Because I think it applies to our default assumption is that why bring conflict? Well, we don't need to bring conflict. Why speak up my mind on something? Why fight for something when we all know it's just going to go kaput anyway? Prophecy is prophecy. And so why fight? We'll just let it happen.
Yeah, my experience is not going to affect the overall world's experience as a whole, right?
Yeah. And yet, and the other side of that, you could say, well, we can't fight for everything, so why pick anything?
So why fight for any of it?
But silence can really be damaging to us if we allow it to take over our default. Rather than being willing to and sometimes that's difficult. So I have family members who have very differing opinions than me in regard to church doctrine and teaching, or the direction or the where they see the church going in the future. And can I tell them they're flat out wrong? Like, I'd like to. Maybe I do sometimes.
If they're listening to this podcast, now they know.
I certainly am. I try to be very clear and direct. And we have a Marco Polo group with my siblings, and honestly, like, it helps me draw a lot closer to my siblings because I really get to know where they're at and what they're thinking, and I want them to really know where I'm at and what I'm thinking. But every once in a while, something gets said, and either something said by one of them, and it makes me like almost get offended. Does that make sense? Like, I'm like, oh, I can't believe they said that. But then I have to no, that's totally fine that they said that. Like,
it doesn't actually affect you.
Exactly.
Right?
I can have some thick skin. But then other times I'll say something and I'll think, did I go too far? Was it, And I've always gone back and assessed, and you want to do some self-assessment when you're in situations like that. But I've always come back and felt like, you know what? He might have been hurt by that. It's very
Mhm.
true. But my intention and the way that I said it and like my heart where I
Mhm.
was in a good place. It was not out of spite. It was not out of wanting to hurt or change them even. It
Right.
was more for just trying to bring clarity. And so, most of the time, I've after assessment felt pretty good about where I'm at with that. But we all at times in life will go a little too far where we think, okay, I did stand up for something, but maybe I didn't do it the best way that I could have.
That's where the practice comes in. That's what we were talking
Mhm.
about earlier, is some of those conversations you've had with your siblings and family members have been difficult, and you might feel a little awkward or uncomfortable saying what you've said. But after having said that, you are more comfortable saying those things, and it's important. Touched on self reflection afterwards, right? Taking the moment to actually assess yourself in those types of situations. Did I do a good thing? Did I do a bad thing? Was I right? Was I wrong? And if I was right, but it hurt this person, then how can I still defend my being right, but also, next time I'll be a little bit more aware of how they're feeling, but still be brave enough and courageous enough to stand up for it. And you can take that self assessment to adjust what you're going to do moving forward, rather than just, well, I went too far, or he
Yeah.
went too far, or she went too far, and now I just need to back out of the situation altogether.
And if you never try, you'll never develop that skill. It is a skill. It's a talent that you
Yeah.
can develop and grow, a muscle, if you will, that can
Hmm.
grow. And so, maybe you start with light weights initially, and then you go further, and you're inevitably going to go too far at some point.
Right.
Um, but that's okay. That's part of the learning process and the repentance process and why we're here on earth. And I think we need to give ourselves a little more grace in being willing to put ourselves out there at the risk of making a mistake.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's a quote when I think of offending. There's a quote by Brigham Young that you probably are aware of, that I love the quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but essentially it says, "For anyone who taketh offense when offense was not intended is a fool, but those who take offense when offense was intended is an even greater fool."
Mhm.
Right? I love that idea because I choose to be offended, right?
Mhm.
And that's what you mentioned with your sibling conversation is, well, he said something. Why do I have to allow myself to be offended? Just that's what he believes. That's what that's what my political affiliation believes or wants to do, or that's what my bishop said in church. Whatever it is, I don't have to choose to be offended by it. I can take that application, that interpretation, and then mold it into what I actually believe, or I can choose to refute that and share what I believe. I don't need to choose to be offended.
You almost always come out on the other side of that stronger if you can
Mhm.
humbly approach that type of situation.
And this is something that I think our generation, our children, youth especially,
Mhm.
struggle with so much is if somebody says something that, and I'm going to be offended, and it's going to so vastly negatively affect my mental health and my well-being, to to the point now that, in our political world, some of those things are considered hate speech, and you can
Yes.
be criminally accused of some things like that, when really we just need thicker skin
Isn't
and
that
just say,
crazy that you can
like,
be
yeah,
accused of things when you just have used words?
it's wild,
Yeah.
it's just something that has totally shifted in the last couple of years, and it's only going to get worse if we don't stand for that change now.
So when the prophet came out and talked about being peacemakers,
Hmm.
a lot of people conflated that with people online like you and I who are striving to be courageous and to speak a mind and to teach truth and boldly teach truth, and said, "Oh, you guys are
Stirring
picking
the
up the
pot.
dirt. Yeah, we're stirring the pot, picking up the dirt." And the prophet told us not to do that. So you guys are actually in the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you say to that?
I say Jesus Christ was the ultimate peacemaker, and he threw over the table in the temple.
And he was the ultimate peacemaker. I love this concept because it's not peace at any cost, which the prophet said.
Mm-hmm.
It's a peacemaker. There's an action in that. And
Right.
the only way, when you truly understand the doctrine of Christ, you understand that the only way to peace is through Christ.
Exactly.
And if you are not focused and advocating for and teaching the principles of Christ, then that will lead to chaos. God is a God of order, not a God of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And when we forget that and think that peace is just being silent, or peace is just letting the world fall to pieces,
Mm-hmm.
we need to remember, no, that's not what Christ would have done. Christ was not just the teddy bear Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He was the lion Jesus.
Yep.
And I just love that imagery. And so often we focus on one side of that coin, but there's a whole other side of that coin that has to be balanced.
So, as you mentioned, the lion Jesus, it just gave me the imagery of. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but Narnia,
Yeah.
right? Like, and C.S. Lewis wrote that with the intention of it being
Lion of Judah,
an image of Christ, right? And I think of. It's been a long time since I read the book, but I can at least remember the movies a little bit better. I think of when Aslan, I think, he, throughout most of the stories, is not actually having to get out and fight. He's typically a pretty peaceful lion, if you will. But there comes a point where he does have to pick that battle and stands for what he believes in, and for those, for the people, right? And that just really clicked in my mind as you were talking about how peace is not just the absence of contention and fighting, right? Peace is not the absence of war. You can be at peace even as there is a war raging around you, right?
Yeah.
That peace is going to come by fighting your battles, by picking those times to stand up and fight and push the boundaries until what God says, until Christ's gospel is what is accepted and stands firm.
So, take it a step further. We often talk about heaven as being a glorious, peaceful place, right? But where did we come from? What was happening before we came to Earth?
Right, there's a big war, right?
The war in heaven, right? And is God still at peace? Was Jesus at peace then? Were we at peace then?
Mm-hmm.
Peace, that concept that war can be going on all around you, and that war in heaven is still going on here on Earth.
Yep.
And it hasn't changed. It's the same thing. And we can either sit on the sidelines and think that we're bringing peace when there's war all around us, or we can get in the fight and be at peace fighting for truth.
Exactly. And ultimately, as you're fighting truth, if you're on that winning side of truth and of Christ, then that peace will ultimately come for everyone, right?
That's the only way to have peace for everyone. And those that follow Satan, ultimately, there's no peace.
Right.
It's impossible. It is antithetical to the nature of being.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't be silent. Get out there.
Pick those battles and do something uncomfortable.
Offend the devil.
I love it. I love that
And
concept.
learn. Be okay learning the boundaries of what's truly good and what's not, and striving to apply this principle in action.
That's what our life is about, is learning and growing, experiencing what God intended us to learn. And as we do that, we will become more like him, if we choose to listen to that still small voice, right? And let that light shine.
So like and subscribe, send your friends. See you next time. This is the No Bushel Podcast.
Have a good one.